Equal opportunity or equal encouragement to reach for the stars can only be equal opportunity for those groups that are actually standing on the same level ground. And we know that this level ground is not yet our global reality. In some cases, we are very, very far from it. And this is where equity work comes in. And by equity work, I mean all efforts to provide people with the amount and nature of support needed to ensure truly equal access to opportunity. That is a very large space to be working in, obviously, and most of the details of what needs to be done are uncertain. It is unfortunately far easier to create inequity than it is to correct for it. Part of the problem is that we can't see the ground that we're standing on very well, and we don't have robust and widely shared metrics to capture our relative advantage and disadvantage. In American society in particular, we tend to focus only on performance. In our stars metaphor, this is just measuring sort of how far high up your fingers get, paying little to no attention to how relatively low the ground underneath you may be. Often, in fact, we are taught to essentially assume that the ground is level, as if equality has historically been humanity's default state. Others, at other times, would say we were informed that different privileges exist, while being simultaneously taught that compensating for those inequalities is merely a matter of hard work, ignoring the fact that some systemic inequalities make all of the work that marginalized groups are doing invisible, no matter how hard they're doing it. Perhaps most problematically, we are often taught that whatever levels of ground might be underneath our feet and others, nothing can be done about it. It just is what it is. This misconception is not just worrisome because it's wrong, but because it discourages exploration of the ways things might change. It discourages experimentation and dialogue, which diminishes all the learning that can show us just how movable the ground is. This is why dialogue, and a dialogue on equity in particular, is so exciting and so promising. It is an opportunity to look at the ground beneath our feet and at all of the opportunities that we have and haven't been able to reach while standing on it. It enables us to see where we each have relative advantages and disadvantages, and to see where and with what supports we can indeed change our position over time. Dialogue is how my immigrant parents, born on basically opposite sides of the world from one another, discovered that they could dramatically change their access to opportunities in life by moving to the United States and by marrying and learning from one another. Dialogue with their American acquaintances is also how they learned that more opportunities don't guarantee equal opportunities. It is also how they learned to put their kids in a position to recognize and help rectify those inequities where they can. A dialogue on equity can help us to all better understand what we have to gain and what we have to give, and that we all have some of both. It can help us to understand that our life circumstances matter and that we can change them. We can also start to see that change is not just a function of applying grit and determination to escape our circumstances, but sometimes, much more powerfully, it is a function of applying that grit and that determination to eradicate the circumstances plaguing us all together, to raise the ground beneath us and beneath those standing beside us, so that the future for everyone can be played out on level ground. The conversation and collaboration necessary to do all of that is the promise of this summit, and I am excited to see it become part of the Anderson landscape. Now to the topic of this year's particular theme, Our Differences, Our Power. I love that theme. It speaks of a lot of things, but in particular, it speaks to me of an underappreciated truth, which is that whenever you find yourself on the margin of a community, you also find yourself on its frontier. You are best positioned there to color outside of its lines and to even expand its boundaries. My mom grew up in Vietnam at a time when women weren't expected to even aspire to higher education, much less actually receive one. She defied that norm. She became a voracious reader and got a night school associate's degree here in the United States and inspired her daughter to get a PhD. My Nigerian dad also broke many boundaries. But the most impressive ones to me are the internal boundaries that he was raised with, defining what it meant to be a man and a father. In embracing his differences from those stereotypes, he allowed himself to be a much more authentically affectionate, adaptable, and inclusive person than he would ever have felt safe being where he grew up. So yeah, I believe our differences are our power. I believe that they are our most distinct opportunity to add to what humanity knows about its potential. As a species, we can only really discover what we are all capable of being to the extent that we invite one another to live out who we are openly, flexibly, proudly, and appreciatively. That, in my eyes, is the invitation each of us here has today. The invitation to explore the power of our differences openly and in a supportive community. And of course, this isn't just an invitation you get for today. Throughout the year, my office and your student leadership will strive to support every member of our student body in both exploring our differences and celebrating the affinities that help us to be our whole selves with one another. Let me mention just a few of the ways in which this partnership plays out so that you can consider ways in which you might like to get involved. First, members of the Student EDI Advisory Council and I work together throughout the year to create the resources and the climate necessary to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in the student experience. The council has representatives from 56 of Anderson's student-led organizations, including all 16 of our identity clubs. We also have student EDI reps representing each of our degree programs and staff support from each of the degree programs as well. Each council will work with my office to shape its own agenda across the year, but we've already seen the council work effectively to launch our year-round What's Going On dialogue series, to promote greater inclusivity in our curriculum, to support the largest ever engagement in November's Embracing Diversity Week, to help develop a dedicated allyship pre-party for our Velocity Women's Summit, and to help us create an underrepresented group speaker referral database. My office also runs a small grants program to which any student group can apply for funds in support of EDI activity. These grants have already been awarded to help bring EDI-related workshops to our students, to help our students attend EDI-related conferences in the professional world. And of course, when more on-campus activity is possible, these grants may be used to fund receptions and other gatherings that strengthen community and dialogue. To further expand on the range of gatherings people may wish to put together, my office has also launched a workshop development initiative to bring more in-house evidence-based skill workshops to our community. The idea is to use our strengths in behavioral science to better identify the kinds of skills that promote thriving in a diverse society. Skills of listening and inquiry, skills for equitable hiring and promotion, skills for correcting misperceptions and promoting authenticity, things like that. We have already begun this work with the rollout of 2 intergroup dialogue sessions that have been rolled out to every one of our degree programs over the course of this year. We have a couple more to finish before June, but that's happening. And we are in the midst of building out a library of workshop content that any club or office on campus can request for their members. Another initiative to look out for comes from the work that we are doing with admissions offices across the school, as well as with several external partners to expand our outreach efforts to underrepresented communities. As the prospect of graduate management education is not even on the radar for many in these communities, we are establishing new partnerships and in-house programs to increase this awareness, providing early exposure to our faculty, to our alumni, to our students, and to our program offerings, just to increase support and guidance for translating a greater awareness of graduate management education into successful program enrollment. These efforts include outreach through HBCUs and HSIs, expansion of our relationship with the Forte organization, hosting a cohort of select HBCU and HSI students for a 10-day immersive 2022 Summer Institute for Emerging Managers and Leaders, launching a pilot year of our new Pathway Guidance program, which provides prospective applicants from underrepresented backgrounds with support and advising from Anderson alumni. Further, my office has been working across offices on campus to create more visibility for important events and news items related to the EDI activities of the Anderson community. We have an amazing array of event announcements, news highlights, video stories, external resources, and more on the EDI website and various related pages. These are great places to look for a better sense of the very active EDI landscape at Anderson and the ways you might want to plug into it. It's also a good idea, you're gonna wanna bookmark that page and revisit it often, because we are gonna be putting out updates for the Anderson strategic planning effort. EDI has been made a central element of that effort, a cross-cutting priority, such that members of the EDI subcommittee of that strategic planning process are matrixed into all of the other work streams that are currently driving that plan forward. So that's curriculum, staff and faculty climate, programs, employers, centers. We're in all of those places working together. Much of the impact of today's summit, however, will not just be in how you carry the experience forward into the remainder of your student life. It will be in how you carry the experience into the lives of the organizations around and ahead of you, where they too need help to look at the ground underneath people's feet and to create actionable dialogue that fully recognizes and supports the contributions and success of a diverse workforce. EDI efforts thrive in atmospheres of learning, and it can be tough to sustain focus on these priorities in the corporate space. Often the efforts move too slowly. Without a history of engagement on these issues, many organizations will flounder around aimlessly for quite a while, unsure of just how they might approach the project of increasing equity, diversity, and inclusion in their workplaces. Often these organizations seem oblivious to the fact that they are not alone, that many organizations are right there with them in that openness, even eagerness for progress, while simultaneously lacking a clear path forward to make that progress. Without seeing themselves as part of a community undergoing change, these individual organizations can miss valuable opportunities to take and spread out the costs of wise risks, and to create the collaborations necessary to empower them when they cannot move forward alone. Some of you, however, might find yourselves challenged by almost the opposite problem in your organizations, where leaders can inadvertently shortchange or short circuit real robust progress by trying too quickly to jump to end-all, be-all solutions. The thing about equity is that it isn't achieved by a specific, static, once and for all resource allocation. Our needs changed. Our needs will continue to change, and so must our resource investments. Equity in wise organizations is continually created by a process that makes imbalances in resource allocation quickly visible and quickly correctable. It involves a richer, more informed, and more informative way of tracking the well-being of an organization. It is not any one particular state of well-being. So as you think about carrying the lessons of today's summit out into your organizational lives, I would advise you to bring dialogue rather than fully formed decisions, which can shut other people prematurely out. You want to introduce a new social dynamic into your organizations, not just a new idea. In spreading that more inclusive, more open culture here at Anderson, as well as in the workplace, you will have given this dialogue on equity and your growth potential the bigger footprint both deserve. In closing, let me underscore how delighted I am to see this event come together. Every time we create space for conversation about equity, diversity, and inclusion, our community members learn something about themselves and about one another, and those moments are empowering. Each dialogue leaves us better positioned to lead in, for, and with the diverse communities, increasingly becoming the norm in our global workplace. So, thank you for making the time to give this gift to yourselves and one another, to Anderson, and to our society. It is my pleasure to support and celebrate you and to wish you all the best in the great slate of summit sessions to come. Jesse, would you like to transition us to the next?
I mean, I know I have to. I don't know if I want to. I mean, this is so hard to come on after Dean Caruso. That was amazing. Yes, I am supposed to do some things now. So moving on to our next session, our very first session of the day, we're going to have a Women's Leadership Institute panel. And Mildred, I think I've seen her already here. Mildred is actually going to set us up, and she'll be telling us a little bit about WLI, and we'll jump right on into it.
Thank you so much, Jessie. And thank you so much, Dean Caruso, for that introduction. So hello, everyone. My name is Mildred Treesh, and I have the honor to do the introductions for Her Stories, How WLI Alumni Lead. And I work here at UCLA Anderson as the Associate Director of Programs with UCLA Executive Education. The panel you'll hear from today are all WLI alumni. And WLI stands for Women's Leadership Institute. And it's one of the many open enrollment programs we offer here at UCLA Executive Education. Now, most of you are familiar with the different kinds of MBA programs available here at Anderson, but we also have opportunities for lifelong learning that go beyond earning a degree, and that's available through Executive Education. We have programs taught by our Anderson faculty in areas such as corporate governance, general business acumen, leadership, and more. Our three panelists today, Jan, Radka, and Adela, went through the 4-month Women's Leadership Institute, which is designed to empower women with strategic tools to further their success in their careers. And as has been talked about a lot today, to empower them even further so they can keep moving on to achieve their goals. All of our panelists today went through in-depth self-assessments, executive coaching, class sessions on various topics of leadership with Anderson faculty, and last but not least, they formed strong peer mentoring networks with each other. Today, they are here to share a little bit about their personal and professional journeys and how their intersectional identities have shaped their career paths and growth. So let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about each one of them. Adela Jamal is the Executive Director of Strategic Sourcing at Sony Pictures Entertainment and has been with them for the last 6 years. But she has a total of 15 years experience in business and consulting for a variety of companies and industries. Her passion through all this is in supporting D&I initiatives, ensuring women are well presented, and in advocating for the saying, lifting as we climb. She was born and raised in Bangalore, India, and later moved to California, but is now residing in Massachusetts, where she will soon be starting an MBA program. She completed WLI last year in 2020. Jan Coleman is the Vice President of Global Marketing Partnership and Multicultural at Walt Disney Studios. In this role, she is responsible for multi-platform brand partnership for the multiple film brands at Disney. She's also focused on creating culturally relevant marketing partnerships with brands that authentically speak to multicultural consumers. The core of her career has been in the field of entertainment, and she is using that experience now to encourage authentic representation and collaborative storytelling that is dynamic and disruptive. She completed WLI a couple of years ago in 2018. Radka Opalka has been an entrepreneur for more than 10 years in the fields of real estate and retail. Currently, she's a partner at a real estate investment firm where she specializes in strategic planning and building relationships. But she also does some consulting for women-owned retail businesses. Radka came to the US at the age of 8 with her family as political asylum refugees from Czechoslovakia. Their immigrant journey includes many struggles along the way, but also resiliency and growth. Today, she dedicates some of her time to mentoring young women just starting their careers and aims to help them feel confident, safe, and supported as they make their way through life. She completed WLI in 2018, along with Jan. And to facilitate the panel, I will pass it over to Cynthia Andriangetovo. Cynthia is a first-year MBA student and consortium fellow here at UCLA Anderson School of Management. She's a member of many of Anderson's equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives, and is now the VP of Intersectionality and Inclusion for the Women's Business Connection, the VP of Allyship for the Alliance for Latinx Management Association, and is on the planning team for Anderson's Anti-Racism Working Group. Her passions include fostering cross-cultural connections and building inclusive spaces wherever she goes. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Cynthia. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mildred, for that fantastic introduction. I am so excited to get this panel going and talk to these incredible women, especially after meeting them last week. So I'm just going to dive right in. We have an incredible set of people and incredible topics to talk about. And so starting off, I actually want the audience to get to know the panel a little bit. And so if you all could just give some background on where you were in your careers when you decided to start pursuing the Women's Leadership Institute, what made you decide to do it, and what you got out of it. And we'll start with Adela.
So much, Mildred, and
Thanks, Cynthia, for having me. So I was actually part of the 2020 WLI cohort, if you will. And I want to say, Mildred, I think we were the first virtual class, but it was an amazing experience. And the team, just did a flawless job with getting us all together from our different locations. For me personally, I was actually at an interesting point in my career where I was in sort of the mid-career. And as many of us have talked about, it's sometimes a hard position to be in because you've got about 10 to 15 years of work experience behind you, and you're trying to really figure out, how is it that you navigate going forward. So for me, I had heard about the WLI program for several years, had also heard about it through a couple of different women who'd gone through the program who spoke of it very highly. And that was sort of the pivoting point where I thought, okay, this is something I need to do to invest in myself. And I always feel that, continuous improvement and growth for ourselves is so important, but you have to take the time to make it happen. And that was what I really wanted to do with WLI. And I would say, not to sound cliche, but it truly was life-changing. As Mildred talked about, the community, the women that were sort of driving the overall program have been tremendous. And it's just sort of helped us sharpen our pencils and come out with this amazing toolkit, if you will, to figure out what is it that you need to get to the next level.
Thanks for starting off with your story. It sounds like, and we'll get into this more later, but the WLI was very instrumental in taking you to that next step in your career. And so I'd love to hear how that other people on this panel, what their journey was like as well. So Jan, let's also chime in.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you everyone for having me. I had been in my current my role at Disney for 8 years, and it was a time where we were so busy, we were going and doing, and I actually learned about the program through some of my other colleagues within the company who attended, and based on their experience, I knew it was something that I wanted to experience because for me, I felt like I had stopped learning, that everything that I was doing was just so natural because I had been doing it for such a long time. And one of the things that I loved about the program, and I still refer to my notes over and over again, is really learning what it means to be a leader. You hear that word so many times that you think you know what it means, but going through this program, you really learn that there isn't necessarily one definition for leadership, and that is actually okay. So I really loved learning about other people's definition of leadership and what that looked like for them within their different organizations. And I think also for me, really learning how other women in different industries outside of the entertainment industry approached strategy and approached leadership and approached their career. I think that kind of what I like to call peer-to-peer, life-to-life mentorship within the Leadership Institute was very, very helpful for me.
Thank you for sharing. I love how you mentioned that you'd felt you had stopped learning at some point, and so this was the step for you to really get back on that journey. I think that resonates with a lot of us as we recently decided to come back to school. And so I think knowing that this program really fulfilled you in that way, I think is really good to hear. And also the aspect about, meeting other women leaders and learning how they're doing things. And I asked the concept that there's no one way to lead, I think is something crucial that we hope to talk about in the summit, because I feel like in a lot of ways, especially if you're coming from a minority identity or a place you're underrepresented, you're told that, oh, there's one way to lead, there's one way to act, to be successful. So I think it's awesome that this program really helps you see that there are a billion different ways to be leaders. Radka, let's move on to you. I know you have a less traditional career path as the entrepreneur on this panel. So I'd love to see what you felt WLI could give you.
So I was feeling a bit frustrated because I knew that I was a leader, but I was very self-led. I had a retail business for 5 years, and I didn't have to answer to anyone, and I didn't really have to work. I mean, I worked with people, but it was my space. And when I joined the family office, I actually had to work with others. And this was about 4 years into having worked with my family, that I was like, I need more leadership skills, and I need to figure out what kind of leader am I and what am I good at and where could I use improvement. And so when I found this program, I really loved it. I got so much out of it. There were so many tools. And I was definitely, I would say, one of the only entrepreneurs in the group, which was really interesting to me. But I feel that what I learned from this program was how to really focus on my strengths and how to be a better communicator with others. That's what I really needed, and I still work on to this day. But I definitely felt like it was such a wonderful group of women, and the professors were amazing, and they taught us so many things that I didn't really even realize, some of the challenges for women. And I felt that, especially the Berkman assessment, what we did, I always thought I was courageous, and that was like on my lower skills. And I was like, I thought I was really courageous, but actually it's the courage to communicate was where I struggled. And building networks was my strength. And I'm definitely great with people, my interpersonal skills. So just learning all these things about myself, it really helped me fuel forward.
I love that. I love that self-discovery that you've had in the program, where you think you know yourself until you're being forced to really assess. I definitely had that same feeling taking the Big Five as I entered business school.
Yeah.
So very similar feelings. I also loved how you mentioned what this program really taught you is to focus on your strengths. We're going to go into this more in the panel, but it's definitely something we want to explore, as I think coming in as, women, and we're going to talk about this a little more later, in trained spaces where we might feel underrepresented and leading, we might focus on what we lack or what we feel we're missing. So I think it's really important that this program reminded you that we actually have a lot that we can share and own. And so on that note, so the second question I have for you all is kind of taking from this perspective of our audience. As MBA students with minority identities, we're all in this process of learning how to navigate our careers and our professional growth in spaces where we're underrepresented. And so, that might involve learning how to network and advocate for ourselves in unfamiliar, spaces and corporate culture, or, how to recognize and go after opportunities we might not have seen someone like us pursue. And so my question for you all is, how have you all been able to navigate spaces and environments where you're underrepresented, whether being the only woman in the room or being the only woman of color, such that you're able to succeed and move forward in your career? Radka, let's start with you. How do you handle being the only woman in the room in your entrepreneur space in your family office?
So when I had my own retail business, I worked with a lot of women. It was different. It was a different energy. I always felt like I could be more myself, and it was my own thing. And though, as an entrepreneur, when I had my retail business, I think that where I struggled was sort of negotiating. Everything is negotiable. You can negotiate everything. I had a hard time with that. So I had to learn how to really challenge myself. I think women have a tendency to, be a little too nice and okay, I had to learn how to really be more no, I want a better price, or how to really negotiate a lot more. But in the corporate world, or in the real estate world, especially in the first 4 years, I was often the only woman in the room. And it was really tough. And I didn't really know how to show up going from such a female space and having a lot of that just natural energy to being in a room with a lot of males. And so for me, it's been sort of working on not getting intimidated by them. Being I'm going to ask questions that I need to ask, even if I don't really know this space. I was not a real estate professional, nor was I a finance professional, yet I entered this space as an entrepreneur. And so not being afraid to ask whatever questions I needed to ask to get the information I needed to make the decision for the company. And it was really hard. And some of the things that I learned from the program were how to ask a question right away or speak up right away in a meeting. So I'd be in a room with a bunch of men, And right away I would ask a question. And sometimes it would be a personal question, just to use my voice in the beginning. So I would feel comfortable, because I felt like the longer I waited, the less likely I would make a connection. So right away, making a connection, being like, I'm here. And even if I ask something personal, whether it's about their families or something about the room or whatever it was, just using my voice early on. And I still practice this now with our company. So that, and I also noticed that I would bring the walls down in the room by being authentic, by talking about our family story, by talking about, this is where we come from, or this is, we're immigrants and we're, third generation, just really making it about a more authentic, like we're human beings in this room rather than a number. And so that's sort of changed everything for me. And I feel like not being afraid to be a human being and to be personal and to see the other people in the room as human beings has changed everything for me, because I'm not a finance person and I'm not a numbers person. I mean, I have to do it, but it's not what I love. What I love is people and the connection and making things happen and moving things forward and looking at the big picture. And so instead of being intimidated by all their financial terms and all the things that, I don't really know a lot about, or I'm learning as I go, I use my people skills and use my voice right away in the room.
I absolutely love that. I think something that I know personally me, and I'm sure there are other people in the room kind of struggle with sometimes, is when we enter an unfamiliar space, like when to speak up. And like you said, the later you do it, the harder it gets. Yeah. And so I love that you have been able to kind of claim your voice. And even if it's something human, not necessarily related to like the meeting topics, yeah, it doesn't matter. As long as you get your voice out there, you're making yourself known in this space. And I love the humanizing aspect and being grounded in our authenticity. So thank you for sharing that tip.
And taking up space. Like I remember this from our class, like taking up space in the room, like not being afraid, not being meek in any way, just being like, I'm here, like this is who I am, like, just taking up space. Like I think those tips and tools gave me so much more courage to be this way in really uncomfortable and very male-dominated environments.
I love it. Yeah. Jan, how about you? Like, how have you been able to navigate being, a woman of color at Disney, being maybe underrepresented in your meeting rooms? How have you been able to handle?
Yeah, I think for me, I've become resolute to when I'm on a Zoom now, I would say Zoom or conference rooms, to know that they hired Jan Coleman, and so Jan Coleman is going to show up. That's who you hired. So I always bring my experience, but my authentic self and my confidence to any meeting, any room that I am in. And I've always told myself that you never give away your confidence to someone because of a title. I'm in the room because I deserve to be there. And so for me, I've always felt empowered to use my voice, but use it in a way that is wise, but also managing deference. I think we have to balance that with, if you're in a room with senior leadership, there's always, you always have to make sure that you feel empowered to use your voice, but you're also being respectful at the same time. And I think that's something that I really learned through experience, but also through the Women's Leadership Institute. I remember we were taught to learn how to have managerial courage. That just stood out to me, to have managerial courage. And so I bring that in the room with me all the time. And then I also think for me, we learned about executive presence. And I think that is such a powerful tool because I think when you walk in a room, you give off an energy. I don't know if you've ever been in a room or on a Zoom and someone is sitting there and they don't have to say something, but they have this power and energy that comes across in the room. I learn how powerful that is. Because a lot of times I am actually the only person of color and a woman in the room. And I don't let that harm me. I let that drive me. There are situations where I've been in meetings and someone has said something that was offensive. to me as a Black woman, and they didn't realize that. And I had a choice to say something on the call or in the Zoom or afterwards. And again, I think for me, it was about what is the best thing to do right now? Is it better to address it now or to address it later? And so I think it's really using that managerial courage and wisdom to know when to say something and when not to say something. Because sometimes it's not about embarrassing someone on a call. It's also about, this is a teaching, this is a learning opportunity. So, those are the things that I would say. Yes, I've learned that it's not that as women we don't have a voice. We do have a voice. We have to learn how to use it and be empowered by that voice as well.
A lot of great gems in the last statement. I love how you started off by saying they hired Jan Coleman, so Jan Coleman's who they're gonna get. Definitely a reminder for whenever I enter a space, I'm here for a reason, and so I might as well be that reason that I love the tidbit about I don't let that harm me, let that drive me. I'm reading the chat right now. Absolutely. A lot of great gems here. I love that bit about managerial courage that you mentioned and having both the bravery to speak up, but also like the knowledge of, where and when to address certain things and how. And something I think we stress at Anderson, we have this approach to dialogue called ECHO. And it stands for, Dean Cruz can correct me if I'm wrong, being like encouraged, courageous, humble, open, something. The E is okay. Thanks. Engage. That's it. Thank you. Engage, courageous, humble, open. And a part of that dialogue tactic is to really, when you need to have hard conversations, to know how to have them, to meet, because what eventually you want to do is create a connection. And so balancing that, speaking up for yourself. Thank you, Gotham. Thank you all. Humility. Thank you. Sorry, I messed that up a lot. But anyway, and I think those tools really help in owning your voice, but also making sure that you're still forming this relationship and going on this journey, this educational journey with people that you might need to have. So I loved how you mentioned that type of deliberation and that intentionality that you do in your interactions. And then finally, Adele, let's go to you. So how do you manage being, being a woman, and especially you're at Sony, you work in like the tech area, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's very similar, I think, to what Radka and Jan shared. But from a career perspective, I've always worked in, let's say, male-dominated organizations, and also growing up between India and the US had a lot of sort of exposure to different settings, and I think that of course helps. But going off of what Jan shared, I think we have to be really mindful of why we have these diverse teams in the first place. So to Jan's point, Jan is in the room for a reason, because we want to hear from her. And as we know, and we have talked about the data, and through WLI, this was something that we certainly talked about in the various group sessions, but the power of diverse communities and the power of diverse groups. Diverse groups are more productive. Diverse groups are going to impact the bottom line of the company in a positive way. So you don't have these 10 or 12 people in the room just to agree on one idea. You're actually there to share the different opinions, the different perspectives, and there's a lot of power in that. I mean, it could be, making or breaking a project and the success of a project. And what I've seen just from the teams that I've been a part of, or even managers I've worked for, even just the teams that I've had the honor to sort of lead, when you give everybody that platform and you support them, it can be so empowering, and it can truly unlock an individual. And I've been, very, very thankful to have great folks along the way who've given me that opportunity. And it's something that I really try to do for the next, the next group, the next sort of layer of people who need to be pulled up. And so I think it's really about just remembering that you're there for a reason. They want you in that room, and they want to hear from you.
I love it. And that is very reminiscent of things that Dean Caruso say. I feel like it's almost like you practice this outside of because something that
we chatted earlier.
Because something she emphasizes about the power of diversity. I mean, you have the, we know the data, it's good for the bottom line, you get more ideas out there, but also in doing that, for it to work, people have to be willing to speak up and to act on those differences and express them, because that is when we get to really know each other and where the ideas start flowing and how we really become a better, stronger group, a more productive group. And it's so important, not just to let people, in the room, but also make sure that they feel encouraged and empowered to speak up and express those differences, and that groups are willing to work through those differences. Like, that's where the power of diversity really lies, in being able to work through those differences. So it is really good that you noted, the point of getting everyone in the room is not to have everyone agree with each other. And I feel like teams and organizations forget that. And Dean Cruz has talked about that a lot, and where diverse teams fall apart is because they think we're all supposed to now agree. And so it's very important that for us, when we enter these rooms, we do what we can to express ourselves and our opinions, but also it's very important, and we're grateful that there are people like you who try to make it more welcoming for the next person, because we need to feel empowered to do that. So something go ahead.
I was just gonna agree with you.
Okay, so something I want to touch on is, as important it is on a personal level to really recognize and be proud of our identities, I think in a professional context, understanding and owning our backgrounds and identities can help us better understand and connect with the world around us. And we've kind of discussed this before. And this is important, not just on a human level, but also it's a really crucial competency for being an effective leader in a diverse business world. So could you all tell me about a specific situation where you were able to draw upon your own identity and experiences in a way that helped you be more effective in your role? Jan, we'll start with you. As someone who is doing global marketing, I'd love to know, how has your understanding of your own identity shaped how you go about meeting the needs of multicultural consumers at Disney?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the first thing that pops in my mind is when our entire global team was working on the release of Soul. And hopefully everyone has seen it. But what was really interesting about Soul was, number one, it was supposed to open in June of last year, which we know was during the pandemic, and the release date had moved. And we knew that this film really needed to resonate and be welcome by Black audiences. That was the most important thing, because it was the first time that Pixar had created a film with a predominantly African-American cast and an African-American lead. And it was very interesting being able to sit in marketing meetings and not necessarily go through the traditional, I would say, marketing cadence that we use for a film, but really relying on my experience, but also my other Black colleagues' experience as Black men and women in terms of how to really get this film in front of the right audience so that it wins. And it wasn't about, okay, let's do research, let's look at data. It's like, no, what is your experience, Jan, as a Black woman? How does this film really resonate to you and your family when you were growing up? And so it was really great to really just kind of, again, show up as Jan and really lean into my experience as a Black woman, but also as a Black consumer and a Black marketer. And a lot of times we don't get that opportunity because we don't have a lot of those films. The last time we had a big film like that was Black Panther, which was a huge cultural moment. But Soul was such a special film where I felt like I could just really, really show up and really share my experience as a Black woman, as a Black consumer, as a woman who grew up in a Black family. All of that just kind of came to life in a non-traditional way in terms of how we actually market our films, and it paid off. The film was so well received by the Black community, but also by the Asian community and the Hispanic community, and every community embraced that film. And it was something that I was very proud to actually be able to use my own experience to help make the movie successful.
That's incredible. I definitely resonate with that feeling of you're being seen. And when you're in creating Soul and creating the marketing around Soul, I think, like you said, data is great to have. And I think we make a lot of data-driven decisions, but sometimes you really need to know your audience and treat them as, people, and be authentic about that. And so I think it's great that Disney said, I want to hear your experiences. I want to hear who you are. And I'm going to be intentional about catering marketing to you. And I think that makes for a better campaign. It makes for, authenticity that people really want, consumers really want to see. So I think it's great that you were able to draw upon experiences for that. Radka, how about you? Being a woman entrepreneur is giving you a lot of experiences. So I'd love to know, how have these experiences as a woman entrepreneur really helped you be more effective as a consultant or working in your the family office real estate company?
So I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I use our story as a way to really make the room about our personal experience. And I don't have per se like one instance, but it's almost every time we're meeting with somebody new in the real estate world or in the investment world. And it's generally, again, male. But I mean, there have been a few times there's been a woman in the room, and I'm like, yes. But I talk about where we come from. I talk about that we're immigrants. I talk about that we're third generation. I talk about that we are a sibling team. And it completely changes the space. We're not these corporate, suit wearing, money, like we're a family. And anytime I mention this and I talk about why we're doing what we're doing, that we're multi-generational, that we want to keep growing, that we want to pass this on to future generations, that we have these big goals to take care of family, it changes the space. So I would say there isn't a specific time. It's almost every time that we're meeting somebody new and sharing who we really are. There's a vulnerability that enters the space. And then they're talking about their family being immigrants or where they came from. And it changes the entire dynamic. And I just noticed it changes everything for us.
I think a common thread I'm seeing throughout this panel is just the importance of bringing your full self and being authentic in who you are and really owning your story. I feel that's so important to hear because sometimes when you go into a space you're underrepresented, you might feel like, oh, I have to fit in and follow that dynamic and, whatever that tone of conversation is. And I think all of you guys are showing that by being yourself, being authentic, you have the power to make that space how you want it to be and really get your full self and your full thoughts flowing and really create a better environment for everyone to really share. So I love that. Adela, for you, how does your understanding of identity influence how you address and plan for your team and the workforce of the future at Sony?
Yeah, it's such an important question. I think from my perspective, I think first and foremost, I really am a big proponent of inclusive leadership and taking on that coaching style, which is not everyone's style. But for me, the sort of old school command and control, putting that aside and really going into a situation where you are the coach is really having you wear this hat where you first understand who the individuals are, just for who they are, just as themselves, whatever background they're from, whatever culture they're from, but also before that, doing the work on yourself. Who are you? Where did you come from? And to Radka's point, really bring that to the forefront and really just, plain and simple, we're all very complex creatures and we're all multifaceted. There are so many angles to us. There are so many different views that we might share and approaches to things. And I think when it comes to the teams and even for Workforce of the Future, now luckily we're having like the brightest light ever being shined on D&I. We're, being encouraged and asked to be your full authentic self. And I think it's not only just, changing what's happening in the workforce, but it's also changing what's happening with the leaders. They are actually now tapping into and sharing and being more transparent about who they are. And that's something that I'm still working on and I'm still trying to do. But by unlocking that within yourself, you're actually unlocking this talent that you maybe never even knew you had. And I have, several experiences that come to mind, but one of them being where I had an individual that reported to me, but I knew where she came from. And I could also relate just having sort of this, Asian background as well. And I understood that, she was coming to work and putting up a front or being a certain way because that was what it was culturally. And once we understood that, and once we started to talk through it and talked about, what we could do to support her and help her sort of shine, it was like magical. I mean, she really was transformed, and she just, was thriving. But I think that many a times we just look at each individual on the surface and on ourselves. We see a LinkedIn profile, we think we know the individual and we move on. But who's really behind that one pager? And I think once you unlock that for yourself and the next person, it's tremendous what you can do.
I really like that. I like how you mentioned, like you said, we see people on the surface and then we think we know everything about them. And I appreciate that you took the time to really dig deeper and really cultivate, this person's best qualities that they might have been hiding because they're trying so hard to fit in and be the predetermined definition of leader that they had, and, not the leader that they, authentically are and want to be. Continuing this train of thought on, navigating your identity in the workplace, I want to talk a little bit about intersectionality, which is the idea that all our social identities, be it gender, race, ethnicity, sexuality, class, etc., are interconnected and impact our experiences with privilege and marginalization simultaneously. And this concept originally in law, but I think, it has applications everywhere, especially in the business world where, creating an inclusive and equitable workforce involves really addressing all the barriers the employees might face due to the combination of their social identities. So I want to pose this question to Adela, as you're someone who's dedicated to improving the workplace for women and underrepresented minorities. I'd like to know, how have you seen intersectionality been addressed in your diversity and inclusion work?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and probably could take an hour just to answer it. But I'll start off by saying, first and foremost, just high level from a corporate perspective, and just under the Sony bubble, Sony as a whole has done so much to sort of move the needle. And I think that's tremendous. I don't think we can say that about all global corporations, but they have done a fantastic job. And I think also, looking at the films and the content that they're putting out, this work starts in the writing room. And they're really working hard, similar to what Jan was sharing, to bring that to the theaters and to the screen. And then bringing it down a level, I would say, more just in the D&I team, even the D&I group at Sony has been so intentional about making it more inclusive, adding to the groups. And like I mentioned earlier, we have this wonderful bright light shined on D&I efforts now over the last 12 months. But Sony's been doing this for the last decade, and they have a tremendous team who works at this every day. And then bringing it down, even further with the work with women in technology, the e-bridges that I've been driving, and part of this amazing board, we started to look at the additional circles. And what I mean by that is, while we might be based in California, in Los Angeles, we're only really taking care of a certain small sector and a small population. And we started to realize that there are people from all over the world who also have different backgrounds that we're just not tapping into. And so very specifically, we branched out and added WIT India. And there was a WIT Mumbai. We expanded and added WIT Bangalore. We added WIT Japan. And what we saw was that there was different programming that was better suited for those individuals, but just life-changing for them. There were mentorship programs, there were events, there were talks, there were leadership opportunities, and we really worked hard at it. And I would say over the last 6.5 years, we went from just having these ideas to these realities. And it was completely rewarding to also see how well it was received, because as we know, the culture and the way that you work in corporate America is very different than what corporates look like over in Asia. And I would say, just looking at those 3 different levels, having that sort of ribbon through all the layers and having everybody be on the same page has really helped us move the needle tremendously.
I really love the intentionality you spoke about in, expanding the women technology group into these different locations. I feel that something that, organizations can fall in a trap of, the experiences of being a woman technology are the same across, all cultures, all et cetera. And I think it's really great that you guys have personalized that. And we're really, tuck in intersectionality, knowing that, yes, we all have, we might have similar issues or challenges as women in tech, but that looks very, very different where if you're corporate culture in the US versus elsewhere. And I love how you're able to tap into those differences are power, little theme, to really create programming that, empowers women all over the world and really helps them thrive. And the idea that, like you said, you're not just taking care of your little circle in Los Angeles, but you're really you want to take care of, everyone in the Sony network, I think is very, very awesome and very empowering to hear. Kind of continuing like on that, you know, what do you think that, like, what kind of opportunities that companies have to really, you know, better address and serve like the multifaceted, you know, challenges and needs of, you know, people with underrepresented identities? Like, where do you see room for improvement in the D&I space in general, like not necessarily?
Right. And a couple of things come, you know, top of mind. And first of all, I think it goes back to that intentionality, and also defining the problem, or defining the challenge, or defining the goal. I think too many times we throw around D&I, we check a box, we see companies talking about it, and they feel as though, you know, they figured it out. And I think that's just the beginning. I think this is really going to be an evaluation end to end. The work starts before, you know, the work is even, you know, getting started. Are we using, you know, blind resumes? Are we actually looking at what's happening from a recruiting to supporting the talent when they come in, to growing them, to empowering them, to promoting them? And that's hard work, and it's not going to happen overnight. And I think far too many times, again, it's just being talked about very lightly, but it's also not being measured. And so I would say, you know, main takeaway would be put together a program that can be measured. You have to be accountable, you have to measure it. And I think also there has to be funding behind it. Generally speaking, I think a lot of D&I efforts earlier were just on the side. It was a nice to have, but now it's at the forefront. You know, now you hear about it from the CFOs and the CEOs. And I think that's what it also needs. It needs to be at the forefront of the conversations. It needs to be discussed amongst the C-suite, but it has to be looked at end to end.
Yeah. Cynthia, do you mind if I add on to what Adela so eloquently said? I agree with her 100%. And one of the things I would add on to what she said is that D&I cannot live with one person or one team. D&I has to become the breath of how you do business. You can't just visit it when it's convenient. It has to become part of your business model. And I think in terms of where companies can start to really step up, and we're starting to see this a lot more, is really making sure even at the top, because there's not a lot of us, you know, that look like me at the top, there's an accountability that has to happen as well. So once you have a leadership on board that's communicating this to the entire organization, that this isn't a nice to have, or if you have time for it, you can visit it. It starts at the top. And so I think for me, and it's a conversation we continue to have at Disney, we have to make sure that every single person who has a Disney ID understands that this is part of the way that you do business now. When we're looking at our agencies and our vendors that are cutting our trailers and our spots and doing our posters for our films, it's not looking at the usual agencies that we work with now. We're going to Black-owned agencies. We're going to Hispanic-owned agencies. We have completely become disruptive behind the scenes, because I think from a content perspective, you know, the content is there from a diversity and inclusion perspective. It's the behind the scenes that people don't see. And that's where we really need to step up and make sure that we are being inclusive behind the scenes.
Everything you said about that resonates so hard. I say this in classes. My friends on this call know that I'm really big on doing this, but when it comes to diversity and inclusion, I say that, you know, it's not just a part of your strategy, it is the strategy. If you really care about this work, then you're going to be all about it. And it's not like a side thought. It has to be, like you said, like in everything that you do, woven, and it's the goal. So I really appreciate you shouting out that, yes, that's important, that what companies can do. And I love to see that Disney's moving towards that and is doing a really good job. So that is really, really awesome to hear. I feel like I planned to this and I really did not. So thank you so much for sharing that. I kind of want to switch gears a little bit and talk about kind of the resources that you know, people with underrepresented needs can use in the office or in their career journey for growth. And so something I want to talk about is the concept of mentorship and sponsorship. We hear a lot that, you know, one of the greatest ways to grow professionally is to learn from others. And so I'd love to hear how has, you know, mentorship and or sponsorship, you know, played a role in your career. Jan, we'll pose this question to you.
Yeah, I've definitely had a lot of mentors, and I think it's because of my mentors I was able to get to where I am right now. But I do think that there is a big difference, and I always like to say that mentors advise and sponsors help you thrive. Mentors are the ones that are, and I guess it really depends on your own definition of mentorship. But in my career, mentors have been ones that have really advised me and given me a lot of great nuggets of wisdom. I don't necessarily think I've actually I have now that I think about it, a sponsor who kind of brought me along with their journey and what I like to call life to life sponsorship, where it's not just a meeting, but it's a moment, it's a journey. They're bringing me along in meetings, and I'm listening to the way that they approach strategy, how they show up as a leader, especially as a woman. And so I think it's important to have both. And I remember learning in the Women's Leadership Institute, which I thought was fascinating, that it's not just about having a mentor or a sponsor at an executive level. It's also about having those peer mentors. So I have a lot of peer mentors who I like to say are not afraid to tell me the truth. They're not afraid to be honest with me. They're not afraid to hurt my feelings. I think we need those peer mentors in our life who we know care about us, and they're going to be honest with you and not tell you what you want to hear. So I think there's a lot of value in having both. You need someone who's going to advise, but as someone who's aspiring to be a leader, you also need to have a sponsor who's going to help you to thrive as well.
I really love that that the distinguishing term you made, and having someone bring you along for the ride, I think is very, very important. And I think it's really incredible that you have all these opportunities, both on, like you said, like the life to life aspect in terms of, professionally, you have a mentor who you're learning from, then you have a sponsor who says, okay, but actually, like, let's get you in the room. Let's have you witness what it actually means to walk this walk that you want to go through in your journey. I think that is very, very important to have. And Adela, you mentioned this on the call that we had before, but I remember you talking about how one of the benefits of having a mentor or someone you look up to is being able to see someone like you really step into their power. And so I'd love for you to elaborate on that experience that you mentioned and what it meant to see it happen.
Yeah, sure. And this is something that, I really feel in the last year and a half is something that I've shared with others, and also I'm trying to be a little bit more mindful of, is really leading by example. And as Cynthia and I were chatting about a week or two ago, I was just sharing that once you start to see individuals who are similar to you or from a similar background or that you've connected with, and in my specific scenario, I was actually talking about amazing female leaders who I had seen, just sort of breaking through the glass ceilings, forging their path, taking on new challenges, and how empowering that was. And I think oftentimes, especially as a woman, we get comfortable and we feel as though, okay, well, we're in our box now, and this is where we'll stay. But you really need to have, that energy around you. You need to be surrounded by these trailblazers who are going to actually push the envelope and challenge themselves, and in turn actually pull you along or help and empower you to do the same. And I really saw that coming to fruition in the last year. And of course, talking to a number of the women in the WLI program, sharing those similar stories, completely empowering. But I saw it in my own company. I saw some phenomenal women taking on new roles, and that gave, myself and sort of my peers the courage to raise their hands, to actually, lean into that and take on challenges that we otherwise might not have. And I think it's so important because even going back to the topic of the e-bridges and the ERGs, that's a platform where you can be a leader, where you can sort of, step into the light and you can take on new opportunities, but you can also empower then this whole slew of maybe at the incoming workforce to actually start to think differently. And if they see a little bit of themselves in you, they're going to reach out. And that's happened actually numerous times. I've had people send me a direct message and say, hey, we loved you in this panel, or we loved what you shared. Can we talk about it? And just sort of opening up that avenue. But I think it really comes to, leading by example. Like if you're not going to have that surrounding where it's really enlightening you to make a change, we're all going to stay stagnant.
I love that. You never know. It's almost like you don't know what you're fully able to accomplish until you see someone go do it. So I definitely resonated with that. Radka, I'd love to hear your perspective on mentorship, especially as entrepreneur, not like in the big corporate spaces where you have like these set, relationships might already be abundant. I'd love to know from your perspective, one, like, what advice would you give to people who are looking for a mentor, especially when they're not in a big organization? And also, I know mentorship is something you're really passionate about. So as a follow-up, I'd love to hear how you've been involved in mentoring others and how you're able to pay it forward and what you've gained from those experiences.
Sure. So I loved this subject because mentors have changed my life. And as an immigrant, my parents, they, sent us to college, and they were like, go get an education so that you can go get a job. But they really didn't understand the challenges that happen in America. The Eastern European, they know that, but they didn't really know what it would be like for me as a woman. And so I really sought mentors to teach me. And they really changed my life early on. Like in my early 20s, I had two mentors, in an internship in college. Her name was Eileen, and she just took me under her wing. And then Jo, in my first corporate job, and she taught me how to negotiate. She would like have me do mock interviews. I mean, you name it, and it really changed my life. And so first, I would say to someone who is just starting out and looking for a mentor is ask yourself why. Why do you want a mentor, and what do you need a mentor for? Because you're a whole person. And so do you want a mentor for your profession? Do you want a mentor for financial guidance or health or emotion or social or hobbies? What do you really need in your life that you want some direction? And I kind of aim this at women. I know there's men here in the audience, but I do aim it at women because I feel like that's where I focus. And so that's my first thing, is to really think about what do you want guidance for? Because right now I have a financial mentor, and I met her about 7 years ago. And recently I've been like, I think I need more guidance in this financial space. And I connected with her, and she's helping me plan for a better financial future. So just think about what you want a mentor for. And then notice women that you admire. It could be a woman in a coffee shop that you go on a regular basis. It could be a professor. It could be at work. It could be a peer or someone, just a few steps ahead in their career. But really notice the women that you look up to and admire, and tell them, say, I really love what you have to say about X, or I really resonate with this. Can I take you for a cup of coffee? And see if there's a natural connection. I think in mentorship, there has to be a symbiotic connection. Like, you really have to feel like they get you and you get them, and you see something in them, and they feel like you're someone they want to spend time with. So, and there's kindness. There's a lot of connection that happens in a mentoring dynamic. And so the other ways that I found mentors is I would join a lot of women's groups. So in my early 20s, I would Google like women's group, all types of women, and just go. And I would generally be the youngest one in the group. I'd be in my early 20s, and the women would be in their 40s and their 50s. But I put myself in the situation to meet the kind of women that I wanted to learn from. So, go online and research every type of women's group and just show up. And I know there's a lot of online stuff, which I think is very helpful, but I think showing up in person to these groups, and also like panels, associations, lectures, and then you see a woman and you're like, I really like what she has to say. And you just go up to her and say, I really like what you had to say. Can I take you for a cup of coffee? And I also think being prepared with questions is really important. So really showing that you respect the time of this person, having a bunch of questions to ask her. And The other thing I would do is I would keep a Rolodex of like all the people I would meet, generally women, and I would just keep a Rolodex and like write down like this, she said this, and she was really this. And, 6 years later, I would reach out to her. So sort of keeping an inventory of the people that you meet that you really resonate with is really important. I have all these notes because I think this is just such an important, subject, because I don't think that I would be where I am without this guidance that I've gotten. And I just think that the natural connection and being kind and respectful is really important. So if you have a mentor there, you have to be respectful with the way you communicate with them. And so my mentees, they're very cognizant of my schedule. They respond. There's boundaries. So just making sure it's a kind, respectful, and organic dynamic.
Thank you for all of those tips. I'm glad this session's being recorded because I'm gonna watch this later and write it all down. I love how you really emphasize that ultimately like mentorship is a relationship, and like every relationship, you have to water it. You have to be respectful of people's time, but you also have to make sure the connection is there and that it's organic and it's something that you really, now this is a relationship that's mutual for both people. Like it's not a one-way transaction. So thank you for all of those really great tips on how to be intentional about fostering that relationship. So we're running out of time. So I'm going to try to go to our last question for the day that I really want to hear all of you guys, all of you women speak on. We talked a lot about, challenges that come with, being a woman, navigating minority identity in the corporate world. So I do want to end this panel on, a positive note. Like we've kind of started on that train already, but I want to talk about the strengths and the lessons that, you've all learned in this journey of, navigating, our identity, being a woman, all the challenges that come with that. So this is, for the women in the audience, what is one thing that you would recommend that we do to really leverage our backgrounds and identities as the valuable resources that they are? Like, what is one thing you recommend we do to tap into our power? And I will give this to all of you guys. We'll start off with Adela.
All right. Yeah, that's a hard question. There's so much to say about that one, Cynthia. But I'll say two things. One is build your community. You have to build that community because it's going to serve you. And to Radka's point, you just never know where there could be somebody who's going to just change your life. And second, I would say stay authentic. And by that, I mean, I wish that was advice that I had gotten probably at a younger age, going through my career, to say that you can be your authentic self. You are enough. And in fact, you are amazing. And just make sure that your voice is heard.
I love that. Build your community, stay authentic. Radka, what about you? What would advice you give? And you can echo if you want to come up with something new. So
same as Adela's. Mine is find your allies. Find the people that are your allies that are going to be there to support you, that you can support. I would say one of the ones that is still, I'm a work in progress, but is use your voice. Just use your voice. I think speaking up, saying what you think, saying how you feel, and feeling confident in using your voice is so important. And being brave, just be brave. And I also believe in one of my favorite things is when a woman will come up to me and say, I totally resonated with what you said. I felt the same way. I had the same experience. Thank you so much for saying what you said. I totally see myself in that. That is the best feeling. So letting somebody know that you resonated with something that they said or an experience that they had, I think that's really powerful.
I love that. Use your voice. And like you said earlier in the panel, just do it. Just get used to it and just enter that space, take it up. And then Jen, finally, last but not least, what advice do you have for us?
Yeah, I would have to say, so two things. Number one, learn how to meet people where they are. And I say that because we're all learning and growing and we don't know it all. And I think it's very important that we're able to meet people where they are in their life and learn about their culture and their experiences, and to give people grace. It goes back to, I think, Radka saying being kind and nice to people. This diversity and inclusion work is going to be a long road. So we have to meet people where they are and go on the journey with them. The second thing that I would say is if you're afraid, let that drive you. Have that managerial courage to just show up. I think showing up is the first step. And if you can show up, then you can keep moving forward. So, and that goes back to what I said earlier, not giving away your confidence to anyone. They hired you. They hired Jan Coleman. They hired Adela. They hired Radka. You deserve to be there. Use your voice.
That is an amazing note to end our panel on. So I just want to thank you all so much for coming and speaking your truth, speaking these words of wisdom. I really appreciate it. I was really looking forward to this panel. So very excited and grateful that to be in this presence.
I am super excited to introduce our lunchtime session, which is called Showing Up As You Are. And in this conversation, we will just have a sneak peek of a conversation happening between Jonathan Wilson, who is an alum of Anderson and currently the president of the UCLA Black Alumni Association, and Quasi Bozeman, who is currently a FEMBA at Anderson. So the time is limited. So with that, I'm going to pass the floor over to them.
Well, thank you. Definitely. Definitely a pleasure to be here. Quasi, I'm excited to just kind of have a chat with you. And just before we get started, do you want to introduce yourself? Maybe for people that maybe don't know you, a little bit of background.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Jonathan and Nuvi, for having me. It's great to be here with all of you. My name's Quasi Bowman. I'm currently a FEMBA 2023, so finishing up my first year here. I'm currently the director of account management at Gavalytics. From Brooklyn, New York, here in LA now, and really excited to be here with you all. So looking forward to this.
Great. And then again, I'm Jonathan Wilson. I currently am the UCLA Anderson Black Alumni President. In addition to that, my background, I've worked for Accenture, Bank of America, Deloitte, Grant Thornton, and currently have my own company. I've had my own company now for about 3.5 years, focused on M&A strategy and operations. It's a management consulting firm. We have about 3 people and hiring more. So working towards, a great practice. So with that said, it's funny, Quasi, because when I think about leadership, I think about a couple of things. And one thing, I identify as a gay Black male. And there's a lot of other identities that I have as well that also, definitely factor into who I am from an intersectionality standpoint. But, when I think of leadership, I think about several qualities that I appreciate in a leader. And these are people that I either look up to or people that I hire. And so some of that's, 1 is showing up, 2 is comfort and ambiguity, and then 3 is empathy. And then, so question for you around showing up, first of all, how do you identify? And then, how does that impact you in the way that you show up, or how does that influence the way that you show up?
Yeah, so I identify as a bisexual Black male. So that is interesting because the relationship I feel that bisexuals have with the gay community and the straight community is tenuous on both sides. So it's interesting to kind of consider how you show up for either sort of community. With that being said, it's been incumbent upon me to take responsibility for who I am and the kind of image I want to present to people on my team, people who I have relationships with. And that is not the relationship I have as a bisexual with the gay community or the straight community doesn't influence that. I have to show up as a function of who I am as a person. So when there's an issue, say, for example, that affects Black people or bisexuals or anything to that matter, I think it's my personal responsibility to have a voice in that conversation if my voice is being sought after, for sure. And even if it's not, to make that voice be heard. And also, I think in terms of showing up, being part of marginalized communities has, to your third point, it kind of just lends itself to showing up for others by being empathetic to them when they have something to say, hearing what they have to say, and hearing first before you have to speak up, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, you already kind of spoke to, it's interesting because you weren't, my understanding, and this is basically from our previous conversation, is that you weren't always out, right? So, comfort and ambiguity is the next piece that I think makes someone a good leader. And so the question is, was that, not being out, was that what gave you a little bit more comfort in, not knowing what to expect? And how did that factor into your ability to be able to grow that capability?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because comfort and ambiguity, especially as a bisexual, it's easy to hide, right? I can just say that I'm straight because I have all the markers of that. I'm masculine presenting as well, so that hasn't been an issue for me. But in terms of not hiding that, I was hiding from myself, right? Because I wasn't doing everything I wanted to do. I wasn't living authentically. And in doing that, I was creating ambiguity for myself. I wasn't sure of who I was and how I wanted to present myself or how I wanted to show up in any given space. So it took me to come out and to really let everyone know who I am and not hide that, for me to really create a sense of actual clarity for myself. And sure, that might introduce some ambiguity for other people, but at least I can alleviate that. But at least that ambiguity doesn't exist within me.
Yeah. And I think, when people don't show up to their whole self, people feel that. Other people feel that, right? They're like, there's something that just isn't quite connecting, right? And then the last thing, right, around empathy. So what maybe I would love to highlight, and if, you want to talk about more, but tell us about your parents, right? Your background. You come from an immigrant family, right? So there's more to you. The layers are just unfolding. Bi-coastal, bisexual. Tell us more about your heritage, right?
Yeah, so that's another thing that's it's two different things. My mom is Panamanian and my father's from St. Vincent. So I'm a first generation American. My parents are both immigrants to this country. My mother was an illegal immigrant to this country. So there's that perspective as well. So, there was a lot of kind of tenuous thoughts I had around coming out. I grew up religious as well. I grew up in a really religious family. So Sunday, every Sunday I was in church, and you hear the fire and brimstone every Sunday about, how you identify. So it was really hard to come out to my family. That being said, I wish I had done it sooner because they surprised me in terms of how they handled it. Sure, there was some stuff at the onset, but after conversations, they really did. They were empathetic to me. They heard where I was coming from, and they understood that I was still the person that was part of their family. So, my family has been. It still takes some getting used to. I have a partner now, and I don't know how they'll accept a man coming into our family in this context, but they're doing their work to accept that, and that's all I could really ask of them. But yeah, that's it with them. How about you? How's your family, come to terms with your identities?
I've actually had I've had a very rough go at it. I recently, only in the past couple years, decided to let go about 18 what I call blood relatives now. They've been demoted from family members because I had to redefine what I call my family. So, my mom definitely, had a journey in terms of her acceptance and using the right terminology and everything else. And even now she does her best, but she doesn't always get it right, which is fine. The love is still there and it's from the heart, right? But the other side of that, though, is my father and my stepmother and siblings and everything else. It was really tough. I've been called all sorts of derogatory, anti homosexual names or anti-gay names. I've also been physically attacked by one of my siblings. So I decided to opt out, kind of in a crap stable. You're like, I tap out.
No.
That's kind of what I did. I said, I was 42 at the time. This is 2019. And I just said, you know what? I'm done. I can't do it. You've had 42 years to be in my life and I can't give you 42 more. So,
well, I want to congratulate you for that. That's brave. And it takes a lot to, like, you know, take control of your happiness and not let other people influence you. So I'm really proud of you for that.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it was really, really tough. It wasn't like, it's not for the meek, right? But at the end of the day, like, all these doors started opening up, and I realized I have been fighting this whole thing for so long that I wasn't able to concentrate on living my life. And actually showing up in all aspects of my life, right? Whether it's business, whether it's personal, all sorts of things, you know. And that was a really big uplifting moment, you know, the past, I'd probably say, 1.5 years, when I've really had time to really think about it and digest. I think it's really kind of worked out for the best for me. So that's wonderful. Yeah. And
what?
So then, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you a question. You know, this past year has been traumatic for all of us in different ways and to varying degrees. So I wanted to know how you think about showing up after big news, you know, big traumatic news for either Black people, gay people, the world in general. How do you show up, and how do you continue, you know, going on every day afterward?
It's so interesting because, you know, I've looked back at my career, and I still look back, and where we are as a society is so much better than where we were, right? So these things were always happening. They just weren't always caught on camera. Rodney King was the first time it was caught on camera, right? And people are like, ooh, this is what's happening? Yes, this is what's been happening, right?
Yeah.
Then you have the early 2000s. And I remember when I was, you know, I was probably just below manager, and I was, you know, working for a consulting firm. And one of the senior managers walked up to me, and she was saying, oh, you can look at the analysts and you can see which one doesn't quite fit in. And, you know, they'll be gone, you know, within a couple of years. And you're just kind of like, I remember thinking to myself, like, God, that's awful. You know?
Is there anything else to think?
But actually that was the mentality that you wanted in a corporation. You want everybody to be, you know, toe in line. You want everybody to be, you know, part of the same thought process. But now we're in a stage where it's like, well, as a manager, if you can't draw out the best aspects of this person who was an A student, then you aren't a good manager. So you're being called out now. So it's a totally different concept where people say, I want you to be a diverse individual. I want you to show up as whoever you are. I don't want you to look like the other analyst, right? It's totally different mindsets. So then that goes back to the question around the shootings and everything else. Yes, I'm impacted by it, but I have to take into account that we still have made some progress, right? And I also am not one to really talk about it a lot. Like, I think the George Floyd incident was really monumental for me because at that stage I was tired, right? I was tired because I had been, you know, I started my own company the past 2.5 years. Part of the reason why I'm able to do well is because I'm not sitting there dealing with DEI issues as somebody who's trying to achieve an M&A, right? So it's totally something, it's like, I don't have that to deal with, like all the microaggressions that you experience, et cetera, which I have to say are probably much less now than they were when in the early 2000s and, you know, when the time when I was growing up in my career. But, that in itself, you know, is a journey, you know?
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah. So the way that I show up is I don't necessarily always talk about it a lot, but I was really happy that, you know, with George Floyd, other ethnicities and other people were speaking up, right? I mean, I just didn't have the energy anymore.
I hear you. I was getting a lot of text messages around that point from, you know, colleagues or friends. And like you mentioned, this has always been happening. I mean, I grew up in, for all intents and purposes, the hood. You know, you see this kind of stuff all the time. So it's not too jarring to me anymore, which is kind of sad in and of itself. But yeah, it's good to hear your perspective on that, especially how it's different now that you're an entrepreneur versus, working at an organization.
But I do have to say, like, I think there are, like, for example, I worked for, I worked for the big consulting firms, and I think we were ahead for where compared to other companies,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's stepping stones, right? As long as we're pushing companies to be better, we're going to push the top companies to be even better, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to be the ones that are going to really like trail the path, or trailblaze. I guess that's a term.
So here's a follow-up question for you, though.
They're going to trailblaze a little bit more, right? So they're the ones that be ahead in diversity, and those are the things that you want to think about too. It's when you think about places, if you are someone that has the multiple identities, where are you going to be safe? Where are you going to feel the most safe, right?
Here's a follow-up question for you. As we talked about this before, you've had this experience where something happens and they kind of appoint you to be the person to speak about it. For example, one of the previous shootings this past year, my CTO asked me to facilitate an in-service for the entire company because I'm the only Black guy on staff. How do you sort of, toe that line of, pushing forward the conversation, but also preserving your space, your ambitions as a professional? You don't want to be a DEI professional, so that's not what you're the organization to do. So what do you think about protecting that kind of space?
You hit on something that I have struggled with and probably still struggle with, right? Like, so I grew up with two parents that always had their career, but always gave back to the community, or always fought for Black people. And that was, my mom will kill me for saying this, but she was a Black Panther, and that never left her, right? She would work for companies, and that was still part of who she was. My dad, he was in the education industry, and, he was definitely someone who championed a lot of areas for Black people and really did make lives better for Black people, I think, in the facilities that he worked with. And it's just kind of a very interesting scenario. So I actually grew up thinking that I have to give back, right? Mm-hmm. And when I saw people getting mistreated, or if I saw something that I felt like wasn't right, I felt like I had to speak up for it, and help them along. And sometimes it led to me being a little more focused on, being part of the Black ERGs, or being part of the LGBTQ ERGs when I heard things or saw things. And then I became a little more motivated internally also to want to change that, because that's how I am. I like being a change agent. And that's not always a good thing, because then you get sidetracked, right? And being sidetracked, you need to always remember what you're being paid for, right? And you can do very well still. It's just that does take time from you. So I found myself even at Deloitte, right? I was working, and this is on me. I'm going to own this, right? That I was working 100 hours sometimes in a week. And that was because I had, 50 hours of DEI stuff that I was doing, or ERG mm-hmm. stuff. And then I had like 50 hours of like work I was doing, or 60 hours of work, and 40, whatever it was. But it's like 2 full-time jobs. And it was just like, I got to get out. I'd done it to myself, mm-hmm. right? So you just gotta keep it in context, and even now I'm like, I gotta remember, I'm happy to mentor people. I'm happy to bring people along, but I can't do that at the sacrifice of the safety of my own health, and then at the sacrifice also of my company. But it is our obligation to give back in some regard.
I hear that.
Yeah. So then let me ask you this. I'm curious too about the Black shootings, but as a first generation Black American, right? This is stuff that, maybe your parents weren't as familiar with, based on the background. And I'm making an assumption with this, but how did they coach you on, on what to do? And how did they, we talk about the talk, right? Yeah. What did your parents tell you? Because they know that they had to give you something called the talk.
Yes, for sure. So it's it's interesting because my mom she's Panamanian, but she's a Black woman. So racism exists across the world. So definitely exists in Panama, exists in St. Vincent as well. So we had a talk as well when I was coming up. There was the same sort of conversation around deferring to authority, doing what you have to do to get home, all of that. I guess in the way that my experience is a bit different sometimes than the traditional American experience, is that I guess for me, there's always a sense of it's weird to say it. I feel like I feel icky saying it sometimes, but there's a sense of appreciation for being in America, because as awful as things can be here, they are a lot worse in terms of where my parents came from. So they have, a tenuous relationship with this country as well, just because this country has given them tons of opportunities and allowed us to really elevate our family status, but it still has these issues that are simply from the function of where you come from or what language you speak or what you look like. So it's an interesting experience, I guess. And you kind of have to hold at the same time this appreciation for the country and where it brings you. But like you said, this sort of feeling of unease about how the state of being is here. But also, in a sense, it encourages me a bit more because now that I know this country is built on immigrants, so I know that my family's contribution is important to this country. So if I can have a contribution to alleviate someone's experience with otherisms, then that's impactful for me as well. And I think that comes a bit from my experience being a first generation American, seeing how this country treats people who come from other places, and knowing that those people are human and they're not different,
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate too. I'm making an assumption that people make assumptions about your background, right? They see you as a Black person and they may not even know that you were Panamanian, that you're first generation, right? You fit in all of these boxes.
Yeah, once I bust out the Spanish, it's over.
You're like the perfect Venn diagram. You're in that little center of the Venn diagram.
Thank you.
So, I mean, it's very interesting though. So when you talk about otherisms, I want you to actually define that for the audience here, because I think that's a very important term that I appreciate. So,
I just kind of use it as a catch-all for any sort of situation where someone is being discriminated against for some immutable characteristic that they have. So whether that be your religion, your skin color, your sexual orientation, any of those things, your gender identity, any of that, that's just my term to catch all of it. I understand, obviously you understand, we probably all of us have some sort of marginalized identity. And I think that it's important for me to leverage the feelings the negative feelings, the way that I've been made to feel because of those identities. I need to also be able to understand how I can make other people feel otherized. I'm a male, so I have male privilege, and it's important for me to understand that and understand how I can make other people feel the way I've been made to feel. And I don't want that for anybody. So I always have to keep in mind all these different intersections so that I can honor others as best as I can.
Michelle Obama actually talks about what's the term I'm thinking of? Sorry, I had it for a minute ago, but it just talked from otherism. It goes to imposter syndrome. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
It took me so long to say that, but anyways, Michelle Obama talks about imposter syndrome a lot. And have you ever felt that in the workplace, or have you ever felt that personally?
Let me take my glasses off.
Otherism. I mean, I feel like that factors into that, right?
Yes. Imposter syndrome is a daily struggle, I think. I feel like it's impossible to live in this country, experience the things we experience, be told the things we're told about ourselves. Your hair is not good enough the way it grows, or you'll never be smart. Like, why are you even in this class? Like, why do you think you could do this? You don't get told all those things as a kid in a vacuum and then it just go away when you turn 18. That sits with me every day. And so it also sits with me to someone told me this a while ago, but you have to take care of the kid who lives inside of you. And so it's important to me to make sure that when I feel these sorts of ways, when other people make me feel these kinds of ways, that I am the person who can go to the 6-year-old Quasi who still lives inside of me and console him and make him feel better. And also tell him that, you know, he's the man. Like, you know, you out here, like they hired you for a reason. So
you really look at yourself in the mirror and say, "Oh, you're the man. You got this."
Some days, we all hope that we have a family, like you mentioned, a chosen family who's going to come in and help us realize that. But every day is not that day. And I think it's important for you to be able to do that for yourself. And also, I mean, obviously you got to call in the troops, you know, when you need an extra ear and a pat on the back, you need those people. But I think it's important to be able to do that for yourself as well.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that myself. I have to say that I've been in therapy probably a lot of my life, right? So, I mean, that was very important, but I pivoted over to, once I felt like, okay, I have a good grasp on the past me. Now it's like, how do I leverage that? So now I have multiple coaches, right? So I have my executive coaches, I have my life coach. And so, but I definitely think it's very important, as you said, to tap into that, you know, inner child, understand those feelings didn't go away. They're just somewhere else. Right. And that was definitely an imprint on your mind. So, I've definitely enjoyed this conversation. What are some things that you want the audience to take away from this?
I think for me in my life right now, the most important thing is to take a step back, breathe, and listen first. That's been the recurring lesson. I don't know about you, but I think life comes in a series of lessons. And if you don't learn a lesson, you're going to continually come up against situations where you have to learn that lesson to progress to the next lesson in your life. Mm-hmm. For me right now, that lesson is empathy. And that lesson is to completely, I guess, in some ways, humble myself and honor other people so that I can get to the best outcomes for whatever I need with that person and build the best relationship with them. So I think that's what I want folks to take away from this. You know, use your marginalized identities to empathize with others and pay it forward. How about you?
I mean, I would say definitely it's be kind to yourself, right? Because you're all you've got at the end of the day, right? So you have to really take a look back at just the ways that we talk to ourselves. Our self-talk needs to be always kind to ourselves. Like, you know, you can't get mad at yourself if you missed a question. You can't get mad at yourself for not getting that A when you knew the answer. But it's we all say stuff, but it's how you say it. It's like, you'll do it better next time, or maybe let's work on this to make sure that we're prepared for, you know, the test, or make sure we're prepared for this meeting, right? So it's the way that we talk to ourselves in the kind manner that we do it. That's kind of the one thing I would probably say, because that's really what matters at the end of the day.
For sure. 100% echo that. My leadership at Anderson coach actually told me I talk a lot in shoulds to myself. Like, I should do this. I should be doing this. And if you don't achieve that, right, you just build in a way for you to get down on yourself. So she told me to replace it with something along the lines of, I'd prefer if it goes this way. Mm-hmm. And just like reframing that mentally for yourself just affects downstream how you respond to all sorts of negative stimuli. So I think that's a powerful point.
Actually, it was a professor at Anderson that taught me the term, don't shit all over yourself. So I was like, I like that.
I like that too.
Good stuff. Well, with that said, Nuvi, I mean, let us know if there's anything else that you'd like to ask us or you want to hear.
Yes, I think we are right on time. So with that, I am actually going to pass the baton to Jessica.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Kwasi and Jonathan. Your vulnerability is inspiring, and it's clear that you both carry the complexities and like beauty of your identities in everything you do. And that is such the exact way to lead by example for us. And I just want to say thank you to both of you. It's amazing to see two amazing, accomplished Black men be a part of the Anderson community and show up like this today. So thank you for your time. And everyone in the audience, thank you for attending and listening. I'm sure you got so much from that conversation. We're going to transition now to a 15-minute break. And then at 12:30, we'll come back for a conversation or more so a talk led by Judy Shen-Fillerman on building career success as third culture leaders and thinking about building off this conversation, how we bring our identities as tools for power and belonging in all the spaces that we work and move in. So with that, feel free to stay on the Zoom and just go ahead and turn your camera off and mute yourself, and we'll all come back at 12:30. Thanks again, Kwasi and Jonathan. Hope you have a great day.